Hey everyone, so today I'll be going over the game between Oldrich Duras, I hope I'm saying his name right, and Akiba Rubinstein. So this is another Rubinstein game. I'm just kind of making a series about him since I'm reading a lot of books about him. I just want to state that a lot of my work or research or notes that go into this come from several books. One of them is Boris Gelfand's book on positional play. The other one is Kasparov's Great Predecessors. And the other one, which I have as a PDF, is Move by Move Rubinstein by, I think, I forgot his name, but get that book if you guys want some really interesting games by Rubinstein. So let's just hop right into it. So e4 is the first move. Duras is playing white. Rubinstein is playing black. E5. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5. This is all very standard Spanish stuff so far. Nothing too crazy. Knight f6, d3. This is actually a very trendy way to avoid the Berlin nowadays. D6. And now let's move c4. Ignore the arrows for now. But anyways, the point of this move is to try to get like this interesting KID structure. But black, first of all, hasn't developed his bishop to g7 yet. And the other thing about this position is that white's light squared bishop, I think, is a bit misplaced. Like the bishop would usually be on e2, and in some positions even on g2. But with the bishop on a4, I don't think this is actually a really good opening for white. White also gives up the d4 square, but in return he does try to fight for d5. Generally, I don't like this because I think that it gives up a very vital square, and the bishop is just misplaced. So overall, I don't like this for white, but I'm not going to judge how people played in 1909, which is the year I believe this game was played. But anyways, so instead of that, a lot of people nowadays go, or almost everyone nowadays plays c3, knight d2, castles, and then they bring the knight to f1 and then hop it on g3 or e3, and they try to go for d4 after some prep. But anyways, c4. And now g6. This is very logical because, first of all, the knight is controlling d4. And often, I mean, black has other moves here. Black can play like bishop e7. He could play bishop g4 if he'd like. But I really like this move g6 just because usually when I see a square like this and there are pawns around it, I usually want to control that square a bit more. So bishop g7 is a great way to try to influence the d4 square. So d4 was played. You don't have to play this. In fact, I think Duras himself played like knight c3 in prior games. And you could just stick with this structure and, just keep it as is. But okay, d4. This was taken. Knight takes. And now bishop d7. Now, white here took on c6. And after takes, he played castles. Now, here I actually thought that maybe we should get rid of this bishop because it's not a well-placed piece. It wants to be on c2, but getting it there and then doing something with it is actually kind of difficult. I just think the bishop is misplaced. In a lot of Spanish positions, when you get a pawn on c3, you could play d4 and then the bishop comes alive. But here it's already like on a4. You'd have to spend a move getting it to c2, and then you would have to somehow prepare an e5 break or an f5 break, which is like very long term, and that's just why I don't really like this bishop on a4. I think he should have just exchanged it off instead of playing castles. This was also suggested in I forgot his name. I'm pretty sure it's like Zenon Franco or something. But in the book Move by Move, Rubinstein. Here I think it was suggested to also take with the pawn instead of the bishop, just to strengthen black's center, which is a reasonable way to play. And then white can try to play c5 here. But yeah, this is just an example of how one of Duras has gotten this opening before. So actually, after something like castles, which he has had in a game before, he played here knight c3 against. Let me just check who this player is. I just want to make sure that I'm getting it right. So yeah, he played knight c3 against two players. One of them is Leonhardt. The other one is Khan. They're probably both pretty good players. He beat them both, so he had some good positions out of the opening with this. So, for example, in the game against Leonhardt, the game went d5, bishop g5, and he got this position. And actually, he did pretty well. He managed to get the pawn on c6, and suddenly this bishop is actually pretty useful. And without black's squared bishop, there are some weaknesses around the king side. He eventually won that game. In another position here, instead of d5, queen e7 was played. And after taking, Duras played f3 just to strengthen the center. And black here replied very nicely with d5, just breaking open the center. I mean, this is actually a bit of a weakness for white. But anyways, I'm not going to go into that too much. So back here, bishop takes c6 was played, not b takes c6. Again, he's offering the exchange of bishops, and you could play this, and then, castles. Bishop g7, and then c5 could be tried again, just to triple the pawns. But black could actually take this safely. There is really no harm with this. If the queens get exchanged, yes, black has an awful structure on the queen side, but he has a really good bishop, and the rooks are going to activate quicker than white's. White hasn't completed development yet. These pieces are still not out. So, honestly, it would be pretty level. So castles, bishop g7, knight c3, castles, and now I actually want to give this position to you to ask you what you would do. I'll take about like 5 seconds. Okay, so white has quite a dilemma here. What does he really do with these bishops? Does he retreat? Does he exchange them? There's also a lot of pressure on e4. It's kind of a weak point in white's position here. And again, this bishop really doesn't want to be here. It would rather be on e2, covering over c4, maybe preparing bishop f3. With the bishop on c2, it's annoying because, it's harder for white to get this bishop out. I mean, in a lot of English positions I've played, I would like to play b3 and then bishop b2 at some point. And I can't really do that because my bishop is on a4. So here, white played f3, which is not a good move in my opinion, because it weakens this diagonal, but also it's kind of like very committal. You basically say that, yes, I know e4 is weak, so I'm going to weaken my king by playing f3. This is a very dangerous way to play because at some point, you never know, maybe black can reroute the knight and then the queen will come in, bishop e5 will happen. But there's actually a lot of interesting tactics here, so let's go back for a minute. So if we look at this position here, it was suggested to play bishop takes c6. Let's say black tries to exchange everything off. Or, sorry, white tries to exchange everything off. After something like bishop g5, h6, bishop e3, this was recommended by Lasker. And here he actually claimed that white should be fine. But I have to disagree with him. I mean, I'm not a world champion, but this is not exactly perfect for white. First of all, black has good semi-open files. The e-pawn is still weak, and this bishop could become a monster. And black has a pretty decent center. It looks horrible, but actually there's no way for white to exploit this center. I mean, black is going to prepare himself to play something like d5, and suddenly he'll blow up the center and fix his pawn structure. So you could start with rook e8, which is a good move, just targeting e4, and basically asking, like, what is white supposed to do here? And let's say something like queen c2. There's this move, knight g4. This just grabs the initiative because the knight is hitting the bishop. The bishop has to go to a poor square now, and I mean, there's nothing to do here. So maybe f3 is actually useful to prevent knight g4, but after, let's say, bishop d2, queen h4, suddenly there's a serious threat of checkmate, so you want to avoid that. h3 is played. But now the knight is on e5, and this is actually a very annoying piece because it's overlooking c4. You might have a knight f3 check. f5 might come. The rook might go back to f8 and prepare f5. And the b2 pawn might be sensitive. It's just a very difficult position for white to play. So, for example, if b3 to defend the c4 pawn, black has this amazing tactic, knight f3. And after taking, he has an insane attack with queen takes h3. And it looks like black just lost material for nothing. But in fact, this king is so exposed, and these rooks cannot coordinate. And this bishop is actually doing nothing. It's very hard for white to like muster up any sort of defense here. So, for example, if something like f4 is played to protect that f3 pawn, then rook e5 is an insane move. I mean, look at this. You're just sacking another piece. And if this is taken, then bishop takes, and suddenly there's this very common pattern of playing check, king h1, check, queen h2, and that's going to be mate. If the rook wasn't here, it would be queen f2 mate. But it's just very difficult for, I mean, that's why he can't even make room for himself with like rook e1, because then queen f2 is just mate as well. So pretty miserable position. And if let's say something like bishop f4, this is forced by the way, there's no other move here. If f4, for example, then you have this, and the king is just getting cut to shreds. There's nothing to do here for white. So bishop f4 is forced to give up the bishop, and then play rook d1. This is, of course, the computer variation. Now, in the book Move by Move, it was recommended that after this, basically, black could play here rook e8, I believe. And the idea is that after, let's say, rook d3, you can play this, and then you could take on e4, and you get compensation for the material loss in the form of 3 pawns. Now, this is good, but actually there's a much better alternative instead of rook e8, and that's the immediate f5. The point is that if white were to take this pawn, let's say white takes this, which is suicidal, then just rook e8, and suddenly, I mean, there's the e file is covered, and there's actually nothing for white to do about this position. He's going to die. Just very, very calmly put, he's just going to get destroyed here. So, okay, if this is not taken, if let's say it's something like rook d3, queen h2, king f1, and then you can take this, and this pawn is untouchable. What I mean by that is if knight takes e4, then you can check, and this is very different from the previous position, because in this case, the rook is not gone. You didn't have to give up a rook. The rook will come to e8, and it's going to be game over. The queen just has to deliver a couple more checks and it's mate. So for example, queen h1, king e2, and you could pick up the rook, and again, white's king is just getting cut to shreds. The queen controls the back rank, the bishop covers these dark squares, and the rook will come to e8, and white's king will just not be able to, it will not survive here. Not to mention the fact that white is also down material. So let's say something like, so really there's no reply after f5. But this is just the kind of tactics that may arise from positions where white neglected to play something like f3, because suddenly, you know, this knight reroutes, and it's just a disaster for white. But this is, of course, just an example of how the game might go. Anyways, let's go back. So in this position here, instead of variation I just showed you, which instead of playing f3 take, he played f3. Probably not a terrible move, and not as bad as Lasker thought, just to prevent knight g4. But it is very weakening, and I still think that white's position here is actually hard to play because of this light squared bishop. I mean, you have to exchange it, but then you have to suffer the consequences for doing it. So knight d7, this is an excellent move. You know, you could look at this position as black and just start thinking, like, what do I do? You know, like I think a lot of club players would sit here as black. And let me just flip the board, because I actually think this game is more instructive when you see it from black's point of view. But a lot of players would look at this position, club players, and just start thinking, like, what am I supposed to do here as black? Like, what's the plan? Like, do I try queen d7? Do I try taking? You know, and he just found, like, a really good move, just simple knight d7. Improving the only piece that was actually bad in his position. Because the knight on f6 was completely dominated by these squares here. Knight h5, I mean, you could try it, but it's not going to lead anywhere. So, knight d7, really good move. Coming into e5, and suddenly the c4 pawn is a bit vulnerable. Now, you can see how white can't really play moves like b3. Like, there's no way to do that. You really want to give white, like, 2 moves to play, like, okay, 3 moves. Taking, playing b3, and then bishop b2, and I would argue white is fine. But because white doesn't have time for that, I mean, he plays bishop e3, which is not bad. I mean, it's fine. I just think that this bishop needs to be countered somehow. And knight e5 was played. Now, there's also a possibility to just take this and just damage the structure like this. And then play queen f6, like, for example, maybe right here. Honestly, this is not that clear. Maybe because after bishop d4, it's not that good. But it's like you can play like this, and then play knight e5, and this is totally playable. It's totally playable. But instead, knight e5, which is fine. Bishop b3 just to defend the pawn. There isn't really a good alternative here. I mean, bishop b3 looks like a horrible move to make. I mean, it's blocked by the pawn. The bishop is actually looking at nothing. Black would really not black. White would really like to get in c5 and activate this bishop safely. But that's not so simple. So, I mean, what could it be played instead? So if instead of bishop b3, if you played something like queen e2, for example, well, then you could take this, and then knight takes c4. And this is just a strong move, because after takes b5, and you win the material back. And there's really nothing that white can do here. So after this, you could just take the pawn on b2, and this bishop is far stronger than this bishop on e3. I mean, white is just worse here, and black has a very annoying passer. White, on the other hand, needs to suffer and just figure out how does he even try to hold this. But anyways, that's what would have happened if queen e2 was played, which looks really natural, just defending the pawn like this. Okay, what about queen b3 instead? This is a horrible move. I mean, the construction of these pieces here is horrible. I mean, you can easily exploit this by playing a move like rook b8. And now it's looking very, very difficult, because after takes, I think you could just take with the pawn and the rook opens up its eye. Suddenly the b2 square is actually very weak, and there's really no good way to hold this pawn. So that's not working. And if you try something like c5 here, again, b5, and that just traps the piece. So it's just, you have to give up material here. You have to give up this pawn temporarily and also deal with the fact that b5 is coming. So queen b3 is a horrible move. Okay, what else can be tried? What about, instead of bishop b3, what about just taking? Seems reasonable. But here black has an intermezzo. He can just play knight takes c4, hitting the bishop on e3. This is the problem. Like, this is actually, like, I think white's problem piece. Not only is his light squared bishop a problem piece, but also this bishop, because it can't match the strength of the bishop on g7. I don't know if that was too metaphorical. But anyways, takes, let's say takes, and, you know, you just lose material in this way. And here black has a very strong initiative with queen h4 first incoming, and then, you know, moves like f5 will come, and the rook will activate, and white's king is going to get destroyed here. Like, for example, after rook d1, queen h4, I mean, the next move is going to be f5 at some point, and this is just a very difficult position for white to play. I mean, you never know. If the queen moves, maybe there's like knight takes f3 tactics. Just a very difficult position to play. So really not easy for white to untangle at this point. It's kind of hard finding a move, but okay, if we go back here again, I know I'm looking at a lot of moves in this position, but it's really important to find all the possibilities. Like, why did he play bishop b3 and why did he play something else? Like, bishop b3 looks horrible, but it's probably the best he got. Like, for example, if bishop d4 was suggested by Lasker, I believe, with the idea that if this is all exchanged, black can play b5 and also c5, and black has a very strong initiative. This is a very powerful queen side. And also, if you ever exchange off this bishop for knight, then this bishop becomes... I think this bishop would be worth as much as a rook, just from the sheer power of the controlling the dark squares on this diagonal. So, like, doing this is suicidal. I mean, black is doing great here. Sorry about that. I don't know if you guys saw the notification bar. Anyways, so let's go back here. So bishop b3 was played because all the other options were bad. So b6, a very calm move, just preparing bishop b7. When I saw this move, I was thinking, like, is there some sort of plan with, like, queen b8, queen b7? I mean, the king side's closed, but you never know. It looked interesting. I like b6. Just calmly improving the position of the bishop. He's able to give it an escape square, I guess you can call it that. And here, I think white made a strategical error. He played here f4, which is not a great way to play. I think that he could just slowly improve his position. He doesn't have to do anything here. Black doesn't have any like serious threats. I think Black's main idea here is to just go like a5, a4 at some point. Maybe play f5 if the time f5 if the time is right, and just try something with maybe queen h4. It's a long-term plan for Black, but obviously White can make moves. So like let's say White could just play here rook c1. Black continues with this plan of a5. Let's say rook e1. Simple moves, nothing too crazy. And this looks dangerous, but actually, well, this is dangerous. I'm sorry. So White is in some serious trouble if he allows stuff like f5 to happen. So he has to be a bit careful here. Like rook e1 is probably not a good move. Maybe a good move is to play a4 just to prevent any sort of advance with the a pawn. Maybe even try bishop f2 earlier. Maybe move the king aside. It's a hard position for White to play, but White just needs to be patient and just not move, which is really hard to say. But f4, it makes sense that White wants to break out and somehow make something of this position, but I think this is a bit misguided. First of all, this pawn has become even more weak. So as we saw in other positions with the e and c pawn, when the pawn was on f2, the e pawn was actually pretty vulnerable, and it's the same thing here. So knight d7 was played, the knight comes back. And here bishop d4, just to exchange off the bishops, because this is Black's strongest piece, I would argue. So exchanging it off is a good idea. So knight c5 was played. You really don't want to take this because this is actually giving the queen a good square, and you never know. The rook will naturally develop. You don't want to give White natural moves to play. So knight c5 makes sense. This was taken, and then bishop c2 was played. I kind of wondered here, why not something like queen here? And okay, if queen f6, then you can just take this, and you can play like rook ae1, and I think White has okay chances. I think although the center is actually quite imposing, the d5 square is available, and the rook still needs to come into the game. So I think this was probably the best way for White to play, also considering c7 is weak. So I don't know why that wasn't played, but bishop c2, okay, that makes sense. Just getting rid of the bishop from the knight, but I think actually the knight on c5 is even better than the bishop on b3. But also the idea is to actually play b4 at some point and kick that knight out. So a5 was played to prevent that entirely. b4 is no longer an option. And now queen g4. White really needs to do something with his pieces. And he's actually, I think he's managed to organize himself here in a way. It looks like White's pieces are actually making sense now. This bishop is actually targeting quite a vital diagonal. So like f5 might come at some point, and the rook will naturally develop to e1. So it's not that simple for Black. So Rubinstein found a really good tactic. Because if you just look at this position and you just like think to yourself, like, what am I supposed to do as Black? If you place passively, you're gonna suffer in the long term. So, for example, if you play something like queen f6, you always have to contend with f5. Maybe not at the moment because of queen d4. So maybe something like king h1 and then f5, or maybe b3. Not b3 because the knight drops. But basically, if White can somehow get an f5, this king might be in some trouble. So it makes sense. Like for example, rook d1, rook a8, not playing queen d4 yet. Or sorry, not committing to anything. You can't play queen d4. And after f5, you have to find moves like king h8. It's kind of hard to tell. And then here, queen takes g6 looks like the most natural move. But an insane move here, queen g7, to try to pick up the pawn with another pawn and not the queen. This is crazy. And seeing this and also playing it is completely out of the question. Because you're just allowing White to attack you. So he found a tactical solution with f5. This is a good way to actually simplify the position. And then he just took. And after all these exchanges, I'll give the move to you. What do you think Black played here? Okay, so the move is queen f6. This is a really good move. How many of us would sit here and probably wonder, what am I supposed to do here? Rook f5 is a move. Queen d7, it's hard to figure out exactly what you're supposed to do here. but queen f6 is definitely one of, like, I think the most accurate move. Just attacking b2, also trying to just pile up on the f pawn. Also maybe queen d4 and bringing the rook into e8. So overall, a very good move. Rook f2. I don't like this move at all. I don't know what's wrong with this. I'm guessing he was afraid of rook ae8, and then, but you can go into this endgame. This is actually playable. And although white seems to be in some trouble, it's actually black who has to figure out a way to break through. Because these rooks might activate, and this king might be in some danger. Like, for example, d5, if black just tries to push this d-pawn, you can play king g2 stepping out of the pin, and then rook fe2, and suddenly the rooks are entering on the 7th rank. So it's not so simple. You can't actually be too zealous here. You have to be a little bit careful. But that's totally a possibility. I mean, I don't know why he played rook f2 when rook ae1 looks like the most basic move. I guess what he was afraid of is when he played rook f2, he was probably thinking, okay, b3 is not good. For a multitude of reasons, but mainly because he's just going to get kicked with his queen, and this diagonal is completely open, so I don't want to do that. He also probably thought to himself, I don't want to defend passively with rook b1, because defending passively is just going to get me nowhere, so I'm not going to do that. And, you know, after rook ae8, you know, something like, I'm trying to find a good move here for white, something like queen d3, I think you could just offer an exchange of queens here. And then try to pile up on the c and f pawns. But this is obviously, like, probably something he considered. So he thought, okay, rook f2 is the best move because defends the b pawn, and at least I could bring the other rook to f1 if I need to, and rook ae1 is still on the cards, sort of. Well, not really, because after rook ae8, white is just relinquishing the e-file. And these rooks are not coordinating at all. There's no way a rook can get here. And there's no entry for white. If you look at black's structure, the only open file here is the e-file. And white has no way to contest black. There's just nothing white can do to actually get back this file. So here I'm going to give the move to you again. I want to know, what would you do as black? Okay, so the move is queen f5. If you found this, good job. Not that obvious. To willingly decide, like, hey, let's exchange queens and go into a rook endgame. I mean, that takes some guts, you know? How many of us would really just sit here? There's a move here, rook e5, but that doesn't even make much sense because after queen c6, just rook e7, you have to go back to defend c7. And actually, I think the queen is better placed on c6 than it was on d5. So, I don't know. I think that queen f5 is a really good move here. This is a key moment in the game where black decides, okay, let's go into an endgame and try to grind it out from there. Because I think he realized, like, okay, I have a better structure. I have the e-file. Let's just exchange queens. And you also have a weak c-pawn. So, really good decision-making by Rubinstein. Rook e4, very logical. Just attacking c4, attacking f4. c4 is defended for the moment. But just putting your rook on an active square and trying to get this one activated. This is a good way to play. So g3 was played to defend that pawn. And now rook e8. This is so simple. This is, like, very easy. And there's no way for white to actually contest the file. I was always thinking, what happens if something like king f1? I think here, black can just play like h5, h4, and just slowly improve. Again, white has no way of playing rook e2 or rook e1. Even though you play king f1 to defend the file, it doesn't do anything. Really frustrating to play this position. Now, in this position here, you're probably wondering, like, what happens if white just exchanges queens? Well, then rook takes, and suddenly this is actually not looking so good. You could even play here pawn takes, and then play rook e8 anyways. So, for example, something like g3, you could play rook e8, and you get a very powerful position. King f6, h5, h4 is a very strong plan. You could even play h5, h4 before moving your king, and if the pawn is taken, you can move the king, and then rook g8 will come, and then rook g4, and suddenly white's position will fall apart. This is a very powerful plan with h5, h4. So rook e4, and white doesn't want to exchange queens. He wants to exchange queens on his terms, which is not going to happen here. King g2. I mean, what is white supposed to do here? That's the question. Like, what is white really supposed to do? He's just going to sit here and just accept that he can't take over the e-file. This queen and rook battery are doing nothing. d6 is just so well protected. And notice how that earlier move, a5, completely shuts down white's entire queen side. Like, preparing a3 to play b4, to play c5, to somehow get a break on this chain is just way too long term, and it's very unlikely that white can actually get anything done here. So king g2, I understand that move, and here I'm going to give you the position again. What would you do as black? Okay, so the move here is h5. I alluded to this earlier. This is a great move. If you look at this position, you're probably thinking like, okay, well, I don't want to exchange queens because then you never know. Taking in the rook c2, and the c7 pawn is actually backwards now. Okay, so I don't want to take it. I don't have a better place for my rook. So you could play rook e3 here, which is fine. Which is going to go hand in hand with the plan of h5. You're going to really play rook e3 to play h5 here. So it's just really hard for black to find a good plan, and the only good plan here is h5. This is just a great move. I mean, it's all about control here for black. Black doesn't need to try and do anything fancy. He just needs to somehow convert his multiple advantages on multiple sides of the board and just calmly steamroll white into making his own position worse. Now, white's really struggling here. I mean, this e-file is just the only open file in the game is, again, just dominated by black. So white is much worse here. There's no question about this. And h5 just makes that problem even worse. And white has to figure out how does he deal with this. I mean, he doesn't really want to stop it because then rook e3 and then queen g4 comes and suddenly this g-pawn is gone. So that's not good. So what else can he try? I mean, here he played b3, which is just so passive, but he doesn't really have a good way forward. Another thing he could have considered is, once again, I want to mention that if this queen is ever exchanged, this plan is still very viable. And the point is that after taking, you can play king f6. So h4 will come, and when this is taken, king f6, rook g8, and then rook g4, and that will completely paralyze white. Because the rooks will be very active, the pawns are very weak, and again, this structure is untouchable. White has no entry squares. So b3 is a move. I mean, it's hard to suggest a good move for white. And now rook e3 was played. Now, it's important not to play something like rook e2. Because then rook d2 comes. And that is just not comfortable. You don't want to give your advantage away. The more pieces you exchange in this position, the more black gives away his edge. Black has an edge because these rooks are very strong. So if he exchanges a pair of rooks off, white has better chances to hold, because suddenly, if with the pair of rooks gone, the king can actually come in and exchange off one more pair of rooks, and then white might have a drawn endgame. So you really want to be careful when you cash in with something like rook e2. Rook e3 is a much better try. The point is pretty simple. To play h4, and I don't think this could even be taken, because if it's taken, I think queen h3. So you probably have to take this first, but even then it doesn't matter, because rook g8 will come, and again, rook g4. That same idea is a very powerful threat. So rook e3 is a good move, just slowly improving the position that black has. Excuse me, something stuck in my throat. So here, basically it's hard for white to find a good way forward. It was suggested here to play something like, not rook e2, sorry, something like rook dd2, which might look obvious to some of you, just to get all the pieces off the back rank, connect the rooks somehow, and keep control of the second rank. This is probably white's best shot, but even here, h4 is so strong. And you could exchange queens, it doesn't matter. King h6 and rook g8 or king h5 just to pick up this pawn is just very powerful. It's so hard for white to find a move here. Rook f3, let's say, rook e2, and you can try this, but it might not matter much because the rook can shuffle back, the king is very active, and black has a very nice endgame here. So let's go back. So instead of rook dd2, rook d4 was played. Now king f6, this is an excellent move. Improving the last piece in the position. He's not going to cash in with h4. He's not going to cash in with rook e2. He's improving every single piece in his position. Every single piece has a purpose, even the king. Just beautiful technique. This is amazing technique. H3, this is the final mistake that white made. And I don't blame him, because this is actually a very difficult position to hold. Again, he could again try to do this and just sit. But it's really hard to be patient here. You know, you really want to do something as white, but white can't do anything because every pawn move he makes, for example, just makes his position worse. These pawns are solidly protected. But suddenly when he plays this move h3 in here in this position, he unprotects his g3 pawn. And Rubinstein just pounces on that instantly. h4, excellent move. Now queen takes f5. Now I do want to mention very briefly, if g4, this is a horrible move because of this, and then after... you could actually even exchange queens, and then after, let's say, king h2, you could take this, doesn't matter which way he captures, let's say this way. Suddenly the h3 pawn is falling. These rooks have entered a new place to fight. Just very, very annoying to play against this as white. I mean, this is losing. You could also take this like this, and then just do the same exact thing. This is also a way to play. But anyways, the gist is that in every position, the rook enters the third file and just wipes out the h3 pawn, which is weakened along with g3. So h4 is an excellent move. So queen takes f5, takes, and now g takes f4, h4, sorry. And I just want to make it clear again, if g4 is played, which looks so natural, it's a horrible move because of rook g3 and then rook e3, and there's no way to stop the pawn on h3 from falling. Like, you could try g5, but it doesn't matter. King g6 and white can basically resign here. What is white supposed to do against the threat on h3 and the rooks being so passive? I mean, these rooks are doing nothing. So takes on h4, rook g8. This was the plan that we were talking about all along. The difference here is that the pawn is on h3, so g4 is guarded. So king f1, not king h2. Because if king h2, then again, this rook g3 idea is very annoying, and white's going to be in a lot of trouble. So king f1, but I mean, this pawn is just taken. Check. King d2, and takes. And black is just up, let me just do a count. Black is up a pawn for now, but this pawn is very weak. These rooks are passive. These rooks are very active. These rooks are very, very active pieces. And white is just not coordinating at all. His rooks are split. The king is all the way in the second rank. This king is well prepared to help out this pawn or run to the queen side if necessary. So rook g2 was played. And now a great move, rook h8. Very, very simple. This file had nothing to contest for. He's going to go on this file. And this rook is so bad. I mean, what is this rook doing? Really, I mean, there's nothing here to do for white. King c3 was tried. I mean, it's hard to suggest a good move here. If you try to be ambitious here, you actually... It's hard to even move that rook because f4 needs to be defended. I believe if something like this, you can actually take this. Because after takes, this is probably a winning king and pawn endgame. You just play rook e8 here after the rook moves, and once the king is cut off, the pawn will go through. The technique is good here. Anyways, so king c3 was played. Rook h3, a very simple check. Rook d3 blocks, and you can exchange now because of this move. And rook f3, and there's no way to hold on to this f-pawn. Now let's look at that again. I mean, is there really nothing that white can do to defend that f-pawn? It doesn't look like it. After rook h3 and rook f3, that's the main threat here. It's really hard to find a good defense. You could try rook f2, but look how passive these rooks are. It's just a disaster. I would even try this, because I believe you would just pick up the a-pawn if that rook is exchanged. So it's just very hard for white to hold this at all. King c3 was tried, and the f-pawn is gone. There's just no way to hold this. King d5. Now, you do want to watch out for moves like king c6, king c7, and white starts going Pac-Man. Who said that? I'm not sure who said that. Probably Daniel King or Gotham Chess. But, you know, king c7, king b6, king a5, and suddenly these pawns are actually going to be a real threat. So, but watch how he completely shuts that idea down. He's not blind. He knows that this is a threat. So he must have seen this all the way through the end. So rook takes f4, king c6. Looks like c7 is dropping. But rook g4, what a move. What a great move. If this is taken, then obviously this pawn will just queen before this king can do anything. So, but this is the perfect defense. Rook g7, and the c7 pawn is held. The king tries to go back, and look at this. Rook e7, excellent move, cutting off the king. This is a winning king and pawn endgame, or king and rook endgame. Because the king, white king, once he's cut off from this passer, this king just needs to come in and harass the rook. And that's exactly what Rubinstein did. So rook f1 was tried. King g5, the king comes out. Rook g1, a check, king f4, and now a3. Now, I did want to look at what happens if something like rook f1. You can come closer with these by playing king h3. And if he goes back for the pawn, you just play rook e5. And the king is still cut off after king c6. You could play rook c5 here. That's totally fine. But king g2 is a good intermezzo move. Not on my game today. And then you could play this, and then you can check, and now you can finally push. The point was to get the king hitting the rook and harassing it to the point where it could help this pawn push. And this king is too far to do anything. He's also completely cut off from the game. The king has like a very tiny mini chessboard that he's playing in, and the rest of the pieces are doing the rest of the job. So black should just win this very easily. King g2, f3 f3, king g2, and the rook will have to move and the pawn will promote. If you really want to shove it in white's face, you can play rook f5 and just keep on going. But anyways, that is how you win if, let's say, white continues checking the king. Also, want to make one more note here. If something else, let's say, instead of rook f1, then the pawn will just push through. Same idea, rook e5, rook c5. The pawn will just push through if the rook is not holding it. And also then this king comes here, and the rook has to move away from the f1 square and also the h-file. So the pawn will still push. Very annoying to play this position. It's just losing. So a3 was tried. This is a bit too late. I think that he was just playing from inertia. Rook f1, king g4, rook g1, king h3. Again, the same technique we just saw. Rook f1, rook e5. This is exactly what we just saw here. Just a different version of it. King up, and then perfect technique. Push the pawn to f4, and this is winning. The king is completely cut off. He can't take this pawn, so this pawn chain is very secure. Rook c1 was tried. The point of this is to play a move like b4 without allowing rook takes c4, but this is not working at all. Rook c1, and here Rubinstein played a really good move, d5. The point is that after b4 you can just take this, and the pawn is also pinned, obviously. So rook g1 was tried. This doesn't do anything. King f2, rook b1, and now d4. There's a second passed pawn now, and this queen side is going nowhere. This king is also going nowhere. Beautiful technique. I mean, this is just beautiful technique. Rook c1, d3. I mean, what is white really going to do here? just to prevent rook c2. It's just nasty the way that this is converted. And now d2. And there's really nothing to do here. You could try rook c2 after king e3. This was taken, and then the queen happened. Now, I do want to just briefly show that if this is taken, you can just take this, and if this is taken, take this. And the white king is not close enough to bring this pawn through before this pawn queens and starts giving checks. So that's completely losing. Let's go back here. So queen. And here Duras resigned. What a game by Rubinstein. I mean, this is an excellent, excellent game. I honestly think this is a masterpiece by him. So some key moments in the game. Let's just quickly run through it. So this opening choice with c4, again, I do not recommend this. If you play Leroy Lopez as white, don't go for c4. I don't recommend it because black gets an edge after something like g6, bishop g7, and the d4 square is weak. Black gets pretty simple play here. White is the one who's going to have to struggle organizing his pieces. You saw how long it took for Duras to put his bishop on c2, play f4, and actually generate something. And by that point, Rubinstein found a good tactical solution. So what can I say? I mean, all of this was good. White maybe should have exchanged off this bishop a little bit earlier. And Great move, knight d7. I mean, once again, it's hard to determine what the exact best plan is for black, and knight d7 I think is the best move here. Knight e5, and like putting your opponent in this kind of situation where they're basically forced to play f3 or else they're gonna suffer. And then making them play a move like bishop b3, you just know that you got something out of the opening for that. And then very calm moves b6, and then followed up by playing a5, just stopping b4 and stopping this entire queen side. Excellent play. And I really like the way he just shut down White's entire initiative here. White, after this tactic, White can't do anything here. This was another key moment. And then playing queen f6, that takes a lot of good understanding. When I say a lot of good understanding, like you have to be really good to see queen f6 and understand that it's the best move and black has a slight edge here, and that you shouldn't rush things. And then he just exploited every mistake that White made. I think the problem with someone like Duras, I don't know him as a player, I don't know him personally, but it seemed to me like, for example, the move h3 here, and also back here in the middle game, when he played here queen g4, he could have also just stuck with like knight d5. And this is not so simple. I think moves like queen g4 and h3 show that Duras was probably a really impatient player. I think he just wanted to get things done, and I don't think it always worked out for him. Again, I don't really know him that well or who he is as a player, but that's just a gut instinct I have here. But yeah, so once this move h3 happened on move 31, White was just completely lost. I mean, also this plan with h5, just remarkable. Not moving any piece, offering the queen exchange, which was also very vital, and just preparing h5, h4. This is just a brilliant plan. Just shows impeccable technique and impeccable understanding. And putting White into a situation where he couldn't do anything about this. And then in this position, finding a move finding the plan with rook f3 and just picking this guy up. Very nice plan indeed. Hard to really suggest what White could have improved on. I think it was mostly his opening choice, and then that transition into a position that was just worse for him. And probably also not exchanging bishops, the light squared bishops, a little bit earlier. But yeah, what a game by Rubinstein. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I really love what I do, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave a comment or feedback or anything. All right, thanks so much. Take care. Bye.